Stay where you are. We are it's really my honor and pleasure to introduce our last speaker before we break for lunch. I feel like we've been talking all morning about leaders and leadership and what we need to do to be successful. We've been focusing on things like communicating simply, communicating effectively around a unifying language, breaking down complex issues so people can understand it, being willing to talk to people that don't agree with us and how to persuade them that they might actually be with us, how to talk to people so that we can show them that government works and help restore faith in government. And when I think about all those things, there's actually one singular figure that I know that has been through New Deal who does this better than anybody else, and that is, don't applaud yet because I'm not done, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. And so, when I think back to when he was a New Deal leader starting in 2012, and he was in these chairs sitting and participating in these conferences, and he was bringing ideas forward like smart sewers, about revitalizing South Bend, Indiana from an old economy to a new economy. He actually was an Ideas Challenge winner for an open data portal that many of you have now participated in. And I think about the impact he had on so many of his fellow New Deal leaders here. And now fast forward to that same kind of special gift that he has brought to the federal government, both in terms of the most effective communication, but also in terms of all the things he's done for our country, in terms of getting our supply chains back online after COVID, the National Roadway Safety Act, the procedures, and of course, shepherding the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure deal. So it is absolutely just like with the greatest honor and pleasure that I am so grateful that he's come back to talk to us today. And regardless of what happens in the next election, I know that his legacy will live on for generations to come of what he's done as Secretary of Transportation, and also that his voice will be a really important one going forward in the future as we continue to have these conversations we were having this morning. So I'm going to welcome two people to the stage. We're very thrilled to have with us Symone Sanders-Townsend, a dynamic, charismatic, thoughtful journalist and TV host, friend of New Deal, to interview Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
As the secretary, we were standing in the back, I said, "You're a success story." Secretary Buttigieg, ladies and gentlemen, he is going to give some brief remarks from the podium, and then we will be in conversation.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Symone, for lending your voice and your mind to this gathering. And thank you so much to the New Deal, not just for having me now, but for everything that this organization has meant to me over the years. I really think I would not have had the chance to do what I'm doing now, and so many of the things I was proudest to get to do were it not for some of the friendships that I formed here. First of all, finding a group that was actually enthusiastic about talking smart sewers with me was a revelation when I was a new mayor. And then when I got it into my head to seek the DNC chair role, and many, many moments since then, I've turned to the people of this organization again and again for ideas, for nourishment. And frankly, the moments I remember best and found the most helpful in this group often came after regrettable political outcomes. So I'm especially glad to be with you right now. And by the way, if I'm tiptoeing on any of those, anything related to that, it's only because I'm behaving as a member of the administration and not here in a partisan role. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is that our work is not done. We have 2 more months. I just did a press conference at DCA, reminding folks that we are experiencing the heaviest year of passenger air travel in American history. And right now that has been coupled with the lowest rate of airline cancellations in about a decade. And we're working very hard to continue to take care of airline passengers and deliver consumer protections. We're working at a feverish pace on getting grants done. announcing awards to grants that are deserving and qualify in programs that our teams have been working through, and taking the grants that have already been announced and getting as many of them as possible to an award agreement and getting them obligated. And so many of them have been working with with the communities, the cities, counties, the states where you lead. We've got overall across the legislation about $570 billion moving. For our part, over 60,000 projects. One interesting thing about that is 0 out of the 60, I think it's 66,000 now and counting, 0 out of them was invented in the U.S. DOT headquarters in Navy Yard here in Washington, D.C. All of these were brought to us by communities, by states, by transit agencies and airports. And so now that the funding is there, it will fall to state and local leaders to actually deliver them. But we're going to do everything we can until the bell rings to do our part to partner with those of you who are working on that. I remain convinced that the infrastructure law and the rest of President Biden's Investing in America agenda will eventually come to be known as the big deal. We've had the New Deal, the Fair Deal, the Square Deal. This is the big deal. And I'm... And one of the things I've said to my team in the last few days is this is not just a time to look back at what we have achieved, but we'll actually get to look forward at what is being achieved in the years to come. Because whether we are talking about auto workers in St. Joe County, Indiana, where I grew up, seeing a level of investment coming to auto manufacturing, which is more than we've seen since the Kennedy administration and would not have happened if not for the IRA, because it's related to electric vehicle battery production, or whether it's the bridges and the tunnels and the airport terminals and everything else that we're doing. Most of those are yet to come. And yes, I will, whatever I happen to be doing professionally, I will do my part to remind folks how those came about, since even during this administration, there have been plenty of folks who voted no on the funding who have not hesitated to claim credit for the projects. And if they're just rejoicing about the projects, then I will cheer them on. If they're claiming credit for it, then we have to have a little conversation. But whether we're talking about something like the tunnel under the Hudson River, that is one of the largest, most complex public works projects in America in our lifetime, or whether we're talking about six-figure streetscape improvements that are going to save lives in a community, including many of your communities that have been wrestling with how to confront the crisis of roadway deaths in this country. All of these are adding up to a better life in this country. And I'm proud of everything we've done to deliver that, and you have my commitment. We'll keep doing that every day I'm in this job. I have gone out of my way not to contribute to the many, many takes that are out there on the big picture until I have done more thinking and more listening. But there are 3 things I'm pretty sure about that I want to mention because they pertain in particular to the kinds of leaders who are in a group like this. The first is something that I said 8 years ago, and I believe even more strongly now, which is in a complicated time for the country, our salvation will come from the local. Leaders who are at that local level, at that state level, engaging people who actually know each other and working on the basic delivery of the things that we expect of our government will, I think, be one of the most important, collaborative, reality-based and values-based sources of leadership in American society. And so you are all about to become even more important than you are. The second thing I'm sure of is that information is everything, and we are not that good at it. When it comes to staying abreast of the different ways in which people are getting their information, we've got a lot of work to do. And a Democratic official going on Fox News is an example of that, but that is just scratching the surface of what we need to do to find people where they are. Those 2 things I believe are related, by the way, because, for example, one of the few realms that is sometimes comparatively non-ideological and accessed by people from across the spectrum is something like local broadcast media, where a lot of you find your bread and butter work is done. But a lot of it's literally down to the neighborhood level, and we got to figure out how to take online conversations offline at scale And while it is not obvious to do that, how to do that, that is something that through human history until about 15 years ago, we all did. So we're going to have to find ways to do that that might on some level be a return to form, but on other levels entail information environment work that is unfamiliar to people who have taken a free press and a democratic society for granted. And so I also think we have a lot to learn from like-minded friends abroad. And the third thing that I will say is that we cannot be mesmerized by the worst things that we see happening. We will be inclined to react with shock by some things which are done precisely with the intent of shocking us. We need to move very quickly through the shock and condemnation into identifying what exactly has to be done. And that requires a more tactical mentality that, again, I think probably comes more naturally to people who have been in the trenches of state and local and county work than it does sometimes to leaders here in Washington. So with that, I will take my seat, but this is so nourishing and so refreshing and so encouraging to be with this group. And I'm really excited to spend a little more time together. So thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You know, I thought I had some questions already and some notes, but I brought my notepad because I know you. And I was writing feverishly because I got some follow-ups. First, let me just start with your current job. You're the 19th Secretary of Transportation under the Biden-Harris administration. You have served the entire tenure of this. Yes, the big deal, the bipartisan infrastructure law, you had a big role to play in that in terms of its implementation. One of the, you know, I used to be a commentator. I used to be a Democratic strategist. One could argue I'm a pundit. One of the things that pundits say and have said throughout this this last, frankly, year and a half, not just the last 107 days or so, is that the impacts of this bill, it's just not felt. It didn't reach people. And I have heard some folks note that perhaps the administration should have pushed very hard to have the bipartisan infrastructure parts of this, as well as the care economy pieces. I wonder what you think. You're the person out there handing out the monies, okay, handing out the proverbial big checks. And these are very transformational projects.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to translate, one could argue.
So a few things I think are important here. First, the nature of infrastructure work is it takes a minute. Some of the projects we're doing, Hudson River Tunnel is a good example. If we work at warp speed, could be done in the 2030s. That's at warp speed. Now, look, some of the stuff, about 14,000 projects are already complete. But there are a lot, and the bigger and more complicated, the more likely this is, that take a while. So unlike the child tax credit extension, which was a good policy that we did, and by the way, that we'd still have if congressional Republicans hadn't blocked us, which reduced child poverty dramatically that next year, some of these things take longer. That said, they're already delivering value even before the projects are done because of the building trades jobs that are being created in building them, even if we haven't yet had the advantage of using them, if you're thinking about the new bridge or tunnel. A second thing that we were up against information-wise is, as one of my colleagues puts it, good news is no news. It's actually a lot harder to get attention on something that was uncontroversially and unambiguously good as whatever the hot controversy of the day, right? And the third thing is the nature of infrastructure is it's supposed to work. Mm-hmm. Some of you who I used to geek out on smart sewers, we used to talk about this here at NewDEAL, that the connection between philosophical commitments about the meaning of life and the delivery of good water and wastewater is that if we deliver water and wastewater well, you never have to think about it, which means you have more bandwidth as a citizen freed up for thinking about the meaning of life and whatever that means to you. So oddly, the better it goes, the less we're in the headlines. And yet we need to make sure Americans understand, especially as more and more of these projects come online, which inevitably, but from a political perspective... The majority of them are
going to come online in the next administration.
Yeah.
Kind of like what happened And so,
Yeah.
you know, the
No, it's true. I mean,
president-elect, this next administration is going to benefit from that.
Massive EV battery factories rising out of the prairie in Indiana and Kentucky and Kansas. Most of them are set to come online in 2026.
Oh, wow.
27, some of them 25. You're exactly right. A lot of these projects, most of these projects. Now, it's always the nature, just as mayors, you know, break ground on something and then their successor gets to cut the ribbon on it. You know, part of that's the nature of the beast. The reason I called these big projects the cathedrals of our infrastructure wasn't because I was looking for a poetic word to describe something big. It's because I was thinking about how, you know, cathedrals were often initiated by people who didn't even live to see them completed. And part of that's just the nature of the work. But mark my words, I will be there to remind folks who made sure these projects happened and who was in the way.
Well, I have an additional question about the projects, but how are you going to remind people? Where are you going to be? You have a new job you want to tell us about?
No, I don't know yet.
Well, I can break news and note that he will not be a fellow at the Institute of Politics at Georgetown, okay? Because Mo Elite already asked.
I'm a big fan of that.
Big fan. I'm a fellow this semester.
I'm going to have a little distance between me and Washington most of the time for a little while.
Okay.
But I'm a big fan of the IOP at Georgetown.
Have you figured out what you'd like to do?
I have not. No.
Okay.
The only thing I've figured out is Chasten has a very long honey-do list for me. And I've got 2 3-year-olds who are just old enough to not only notice but care when I'm gone. And I'm really excited to be spending more time with them in Michigan. And I know that I will make myself useful later. I just don't know how.
Okay. I might ask again before we're done. Have you
if I figure it out in the next 10 minutes, I'll tell you.
Have you spoken to your potential successor about this role and advocated for any of the work that your team has done to be continued in this new with this new administration, with the new secretary? Yeah,
so I did reach out to him. We had a good conversation. I let him know that he has been named to the best job in the federal government, and he'll be, in my biased but accurate opinion, working with the best people in public service. Look, there's a strong tradition in our department of former secretaries rooting for the department to succeed, whoever's in charge. I have strong views about policy. I will continue to make them known to anybody who listens. It happened today at DCA, where we learned that some airline CEOs are hopeful that the next administration will be less passenger-friendly than this one.
They said you have engaged in overregulation from their perspective. That, this getting the people their money back when we sit on the tarmac too long. I've been radicalized by sitting on the tarmac too long. Let me just tell you. Okay?
All of us have been at some point.
I feel some type of way.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you engage in overregulation?
No, of course not. We feel that we did the right thing. I mean, look, we have these authorities for a reason. Now, there are some authorities our department hadn't really picked up and used, but they're there. And to me, that means we not only are allowed, but are obliged to use them to make people better off. And I'll tell you, we get a lot of complaints, thousands of complaints about aviation. We haven't got a whole lot of complaints from passengers saying, I'm really upset that you arranged for me to get an automatic refund when my flight got canceled. I was really hoping you would keep that money in the hands of the airline and make me fight them for 9 months to get a refund or give me these points I didn't even want. Nobody's ever written us and said, this airline told me that I could get a trip to Hawaii if I signed up for that credit card that they make the flight attendants tell us about, and now I can't. And I really have come to realize that I was wrong to believe the airline in the first place, and it's really my fault as a customer. Right? Like, come on, like this. And by the way, again, I will, far be it for me to speculate on what the next administration will do, but if not in Washington, certainly in America, these are bipartisan priorities that people want to see get done. And I might add, we are not finished.
What does that mean you're not finished? Because let me just say, 66,000 projects, over $700 billion out the door. You were trying to get all of the money out the door. To be clear, out the door means awarded, but not necessarily check written or funds wired. You cannot guarantee, right, or maybe you can. I'll let you answer the question. But can you guarantee that the monies will continue to flow even after January 20th, 2025?
I can guarantee we're doing everything we can to make sure that they do. But look, the reality is a new administration is a new administration. Now, the more of those awards can be covered by a grant agreement, the better, because it is more difficult to to withdraw dollars from something that the federal government has committed in writing to providing. But I also think, again, out around the country, communities that find that the administration, the federal government made a promise to them, and somebody tries to take that back, I think that kind of policy change will arouse a very serious response that would hopefully protect those funds.
What haven't you done yet that you are planning to do in these next 2 months?
Well, stay tuned. But
You don't answer none of my questions. This is how they feel on Fox News when Pete Buttigieg comes on.
We're working. We've got more awards to announce. 3 or 4 major programs where I think we can make the announcements responsibly before we're done. Just in the last 30 days, we've done almost 800 projects that have been funded, billions of dollars that we've been able to move. We're not stopping because of the political calendar. We are working on rules, including a rule that would require compensation for airline passengers. Right now, you can get a refund, but in many parts of the world, you get compensated for your time if it's clearly the airline's fault that you were delayed for an extremely long amount of time. Mm-hmm. And so we're working on a rule that could contemplate that. And several other measures that we think will either enhance a passenger experience or the safety of the traveling public.
I remember in November-ish 2020, after it was clear that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had won the election, and there were many people that were talking about the jobs that they wanted and what they wanted to do. And there were some people, when they heard the inklings that you were up for some different things, but that you, after the fact, when you were going to be the transportation secretary, there were some individuals in Washington, D.C. that said, he doesn't even have an airport. He's a small town mayor. He doesn't even have an airport. Well,
people were saying that. Yeah,
you can respond to the critics. Is this a job that you asked for? 1, and then 2, why transportation secretary? One could argue, hindsight, looks like you had one of the best jobs. Okay. Out there, handing out checks, cutting ribbons, and the nitty-gritty of the stuff. Kind of reminds me of a job Joe Biden had when he was the vice president, handing out checks, cutting ribbons, giving people stuff. Sure did help him when he ran for president again. So just wondering why you wanted this job. I was going to circle back.
Gosh. So I did not ask for a specific job from the president-elect. I knew that if he thought I could fit on the team, he'd let me know how. But I was thrilled when he did, and when he said this is what he wanted me to work on. Because even then, in our very first conversation about this, he said this is going to be a big era for American transportation. And he was right. Administration after administration. Honestly, one of the few times Donald Trump had me fooled when I was sitting in these seats was I actually thought he was going to do that infrastructure package he was talking about.
Oh, yeah, Infrastructure Week.
Everybody wanted, Infrastructure Week. Annual Infrastructure Week with no result, right? But I really thought they would do it, and they didn't. But I knew that Joe Biden would do it, and I wanted to be part. I was excited to be part of that. I think any mayor will tell you that transportation is part of the beating heart of what they work on. Public works, in our case, we reimagined the whole streetscape at the core of our city. Back then, there wasn't an infrastructure bill, so I didn't get any funding from the Department of Transportation. They gave us a nice award, though, so I appreciated that. At least we had the moral support, which is something.
A for effort.
So I knew this was the kind of thing I wanted to work on. And frankly, I valued the fact that a lot of what we work on does not have an immediate ideological partisan valence. That everybody wants a better bridge, a better road, a better tunnel, a better airport experience. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, we had partisan fights over the fact that there are climate implications to every transportation decision, because the single biggest contributor in the U.S. economy to greenhouse gas pollution is the transportation sector. We had fights over labor, and not everybody was on board with our commitment to being the most pro-worker administration that there's ever been. We had all kinds of fights. I aroused a surprising level of controversy by suggesting that we should do something about the places where infrastructure was used to reinforce segregation. I imagined that desegregation was a pretty uncontroversial proposition, but that turned out to be a political fight too.
Mm-hmm. Like in Detroit, for example.
Detroit, I-375 cuts like a gash through Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. and that were thriving neighborhoods in their day. And there's stories like that. This isn't just something that happened in a few places in the South. Detroit, St. Paul, Minnesota, Buffalo, one of the biggest projects we're doing, Syracuse. A lot of this is New York State. Nobody is worse off when we do that. There are healthy local debates about how to do it right, and that makes sense because obviously there are communities that think twice when anybody says we're here with federal transportation dollars and we're here to help, right? So we have honored that difficult local conversation. But I think it's unfortunate that that became a political football in Washington because nobody is harmed by dealing with some of the harms of the past. Chinatown in Philly, the Vine Street Expressway. And that didn't happen like back in the 40s. They finished that in the 90s, and it cut Chinatown in two. And we're doing something about it. I'm proud of that work. But again, alongside that kind of work that got a lot of headwinds here in Washington, a lot of the work is truly nonpartisan in its nature. And having cut my teeth as a mayor, where famously there's no Democratic or Republican way to pick up the trash, I really enjoyed that.
You talked about your 3 things that you were sure about. We talked about one of those, information, and how people get it and how folks should be communicating. You have to go different places and spaces. Your first was that in complicated times, salvation is going to come from the local level. You talked about reality and values-based solutions. The people in this room and many people on the Zooms out there that are watching, they are wondering what this transition to a new administration will mean for them and their communities, how they navigate the changes in the federal government. But I think they're also wondering about these conversations that they are seeing playing out online. They're seeing playing out on cable television, if they're watching, on the podcast, if they're listening, about this. It seems to be this tug and pull between who people should be talking about and who people should be fighting for. What do you think? Who is working class in America to you?
Well, first of all, if anybody who regards themselves as working class doesn't think that we have their back, that is shame on us. Yeah. We got work to do.
But who is the working class, I guess? Because some would argue that talking about working class people is code for white working class people. And I don't think we should assume who one is talking about when they use the term. And I was struck by the fact that middle class, working class didn't find its way into your 3 things. I think that was intentional because I find you to be quite intentional when you speak. So
look, there are certain middle class is thrown around in political rhetoric so often that I think it's lost most of its meaning. And for every time we've overused the term middle class, though I'm proud of the record that this administration has in supporting the middle class, not least by supporting workers. And I would add, supporting opportunities for people who were not prototypically considered to be part of union workforces, including more black and brown workers and more women, not just through kind of moralizing and browbeating, but by making sure there's a child care center at a work site so a working mom can get there, or by engaging the local unions to create pathways into that union for people who had been left out. But anyway, for all that we use the word middle class, a word we haven't used a lot is poverty. And a lot of people are in poverty. They are poor or low-income Americans, white, black, brown, who don't know if we have their back. And that's a problem. The last time I checked, there's not one county in America where somebody working on minimum wage full-time can actually afford an apartment. We've got work to do. And that's not just the information environment. Definitely got work to do in the information environment. We have substantive work to do to count on the people, to take care of people who count on us, who count on government to help address their problems. And the simple fact is not enough people have felt that. And here's one way to think about it. There's imagine 2 different citizens who have been skeptical of us on the economy. Citizen 1 sees us talking rightly, proudly about all the jobs we created and the fact that we're handing to the next administration an economy with 2% inflation, 3% growth, and 4% unemployment and 5 to 6% interest rates. Not a lot of administrations have gotten that on the way in. But that doesn't help them. They are not part of the average whose real wages have gone up, even accounting for inflation. They are not seeing, they were hoping to buy a house, and it's not happening for them anytime soon. And so they're pissed, right? That means that for all of the great policy things we've done, not all of that has caught up to them. Now, I can give you all the reasons why. That voter will be better off when we continue our industrial strategy, continue creating jobs, continue to raise wages, and if we had a chance to do things like have insulin at $35 not just be for seniors, be for everybody. Do things like make sure there's actually paid family leave in this country, right? I can give you all the list of why we're the right answer. But they may well be skeptical of us because of results, and that creates a policy or a delivery problem for us. Compare that to citizen number 2. It's all hypothetical, but imagine a citizen number 2 who, if you ask them how their economy is doing, she'll say, oh, I'm great. I got a raise. I'm definitely better off than I was 5 years ago. I'm expecting a promotion, and I'm about to buy a house. She's happy with her personal economy. And also is among the 50% of Americans who believe that unemployment is at an all-time high right now. In that case, that's an information problem. Did you all know that was true? Yeah, roughly half of America believes that unemployment is at an all-time, or at or near an all-time high. So why does somebody think that? Do they think that because they're actually citizen number 1, and when they hear unemployment, what they really mean is just my economy and my economy sucks? Or are they citizen 2, who actually thinks their own economy is great, but see a lot, aren't getting media from sources that report the fact that unemployment is in fact at its longest level of being low in peacetime in, I think, since long before I was born, right? How we respond to those two challenges, each of which is very different, I think is a big part of what we have to do going forward and have to get right.
This is one of the best answers I've actually heard on that issue. So,
Thank you.
I'm gonna clip this one for the streets.
So.
Before the streets might have already clipped it, sir, if I'm being honest. I guess lastly, if you had to give, because look, I know you're like, we got to listen, we got to talk, local leaders. I think there's a lot of people that agree with you. I personally would agree with you on that. I think there's a lot of listening that needs to be done still before ways are charted forward for a lot of people that I used to work for and in that party. However, folks want answers now. Decisions are going to be made now. The mayors across the country, the local leaders across the country, they have to make decisions right now about how they are going to engage. What are the 2 tangible things you would tell them?
I would say it all comes down to the politics of the everyday.
What does that mean?
It means, before you can get into it politically, I will just say philosophically. If you back all the way up, at least if I do, the point of all of this is to make somebody's everyday life better. And that's true whether we're talking about literal bread and butter issues. And by literal, I mean, agriculture policy. Or whether we're talking about what is classed as social issues, but the reason it actually matters is it matters in somebody's everyday life. Nothing is more kitchen table for me than the fact that when I'm at my kitchen table, my husband and 2 children are there with me, right? That's not some abstract social theory commitment to me. That's our kitchen table. But what all of those different things have in common is they're about everyday life and how it gets better or it gets worse based on the decisions that people in big white buildings in Washington, D.C., and much closer to home in City Hall, and everywhere in between, make. And we have to orient our practice around that. Our rhetoric, of course, but also our work. And not get caught up. And one of the many reasons I think salvation will come from the local is it's easier to not get caught up in all the games that are played around here when you are accountable to the constituent who stops you at the grocery store, or when you yourself, because local leaders and officials eat what you cook because you are by definition residents and citizens of the places where you lead and govern, actually realize, oh yeah, there is a problem with trash pickup because my trash didn't get picked up. I better call my public works department and see what's going on, right? Like, staying oriented to that is absolutely consistent with our values, our philosophies. But it reminds us that what matters about our values and philosophies is how they cash out in making people's lives better, not the other way around. And it will be especially difficult to do that given all of these shiny objects that will be cast before the American people on an exhausting hourly basis for the next many years, as they have been for the last 9 years or so. Because that's going to keep going. And sometimes they'll do something that you have to respond to. Like, morally, you have to respond, and yet you cannot let it dominate the agenda. And there will continue to be examples of people who figure out how to navigate the toughest issue. Sarah McBride, remember elected in Congress, right? New Deal leader? I knew it, right? So figured out how to make very clear, like, what they're doing is wrong. But that's not what I came here to fight over. I came here to fight for my constituents. So even though what they're doing is wrong, that's not what I'm about right now. And it didn't give any ground to people who are doing something cruel and wrong. But also reminded everybody that they're the ones who are worried about where other people go to the bathroom. She's worried about how to make life more affordable for people who live in Delaware who elected her and sent her to Congress to deal with that. And put them on the defensive. Let the Speaker of the House of the United States of Representatives, not some high school model Congress, but the actual United States Congress that writes the laws that we all have to live by, explain how in a country that has crises ranging from the character of its democracy to the affordability of its housing, why he is spending 1 second of his time policing where one of his congressional colleagues gets to go to the bathroom. Right? That's the politics of everyday life, and that's what we got to get back to.
Let me also just say, I think the culture wars for the current Republican Party apparatus, they are in fact a playbook, but they're also a distraction. And maybe an understanding of that would make a lot more people better off in how they fight the good fights and the real fights in this country. Secretary Pete Buttigieg, it's just been so lovely to chat with you. 19th Secretary of the Department of Transportation, ladies and gentlemen, New Deal alum, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Thank you for your time.